Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right in, digging into a pattern of major corruption allegations that emerged during the Rodrigo Duterte era, pulling directly from the official complaints and investigative reports that captured headlines.
And let's start with this really powerful statement from the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, also known as the OCCRP. This quote from back in 2017, it really sets the stage. It suggests the issue wasn't just about one person, but about a system that allegedly empowered corruption in a whole new way. So, where do we begin? Well, maybe not where you'd expect. We're not starting with a local case, but with an international award that put a huge global spotlight on the administration very early on. That's right, the organization gave him this dubious title because of his brutal war on drugs. Now, they claimed it went far beyond just targeting criminals. They said it empowered a bully-run system of survival of the fiercest. And their conclusion? That these policies ultimately made the Philippines, and I'm quoting here, more corrupt, more cruel, and less democratic.
Okay, so from that big international picture, let's zoom right in. We're going to look at specific allegations that involve people at the absolute center of power. Now, these charges, which were filed by a former senator, are built on a deep dive report from 2018 by the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. The core of the complaint alleges that billions of pesos in public works contracts went to construction companies owned by the father and brother of Senator Bong Go. And just look at the numbers here. This is where it gets really eye-opening. According to one investigation, a company owned by Senator Go's father got contracts worth about 352 million pesos in 2016. Okay, but then in 2017, the first full year of the Duterte presidency, that number just explodes to over 3 billion pesos. That's almost a tenfold jump in a single year.
And that wasn't the end of it. The formal complaint that was filed in 2024 alleges that this company, plus another one owned by Go's brother, ended up winning government projects that totaled more than 6.6 billion pesos by 2018.
So let's follow this thread, because its alleged pattern seems to pop up again during moments of national crisis, leading to two huge scandals that directly hit healthcare and education.
First up, the Pharmaly scandal. You probably remember this one. It erupted right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. A Senate investigation started looking into these massive government deals for medical supplies. And what they found? Well, it was a bombshell. And here's the crazy part investigators uncovered. On one hand, you have Pharmaly, this small, pretty new company with a paid-up capital of just 625,000 pesos. On the other hand, it somehow managed to secure government contracts for pandemic supplies worth a mind-boggling 11.7 billion pesos. And the alleged backer? Duterte's former economic advisor. And the details that came out during those Senate hearings were just wild. We're talking about allegations of ridiculously overpriced face masks, buying test kits that were apparently close to expiring, and then reports that after getting these deals, company executives were spotted buying luxury sports cars. But the story of questionable public funds doesn't end there. Another firestorm was brewing, this time over the use of confidential and intelligence funds at the Department of Education, which was being led by then Vice President Sara Duterte. And this number, 125 million pesos, this is what really lit the fuse. This is the amount of confidential funds that the Office of the Vice President allegedly burned through in, get this, just 11 days at the end of 2022. That is over 11 million pesos a day. So you might be thinking, what does 125 million pesos even mean in the real world? Well, to put that into perspective, the IBON Foundation, an economic think tank, did the math for us, and the results are pretty stunning. That money could have built hundreds of new classrooms, bought millions of textbooks, or paid the salaries for thousands of new teachers. So with all these different headlines, the construction contracts, the pandemic supplies, the education funds, investigative journalists started connecting the dots. They began to ask a really crucial question. Are these just isolated incidents, or are we looking at a much bigger, more systemic problem? And a 2018 report by the PCIJ found a really striking concentration of contracts. Just look at this. In the first year and a half of the administration, a tiny group of just 10 contractors managed to gobble up 14% of all public works projects. That's 68.5 billion pesos for just 10 companies, while over 2,000 other contractors had to fight for what was left. So who are these top 10 companies? Well, the PCIJ investigation dug into their backgrounds, and what they found was a whole bunch of red flags.
We're talking about firms where officers were already facing graft trials, companies that had been suspended or blacklisted before, and several with direct ties to politicians.
And here's a perfect example of how this supposedly worked. The number one contractor, a company called St. Gerard, gets suspended. Why? For allegedly using a fake tax document. But just 3 months later, a new company pops up with a nearly identical name and the same owner. And guess what? It went on to win billions in new contracts.
Okay, so after all of that, after all these reports and investigations and allegations, it all boils down to one critical question, right? Accountability. What has actually been done? This timeline really shows just how slow and complicated the road to accountability can be. You see the Farmally scandal explode in 2021, but it takes 2 full years for the ombudsman to even recommend charges. And even then, some key figures were cleared. Other huge cases, like the ones against Duterte himself, weren't even filed until years after he'd left office.
So what were the actual consequences for the people at the center of all this? In the Farmally case, many of the central figures have faced pretty limited repercussions. After being held during the Senate investigation, key executives were released. Meanwhile, President Duterte was never implicated in that case, and his health secretary was formally cleared of all charges.
And that leaves us right here with this massive final question. When you're not just talking about one single bad deal, but a whole pattern of allegations that cuts across multiple government departments and national crises, what does accountability truly look like? And maybe even more importantly, how does a country begin to restore public trust once it's been so badly shaken? That's the real question all of this material leaves us with.